Yeah, we are good to go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and zooming in and streaming in. Very excited to be here. This particular topic is extremely close to my heart. My name is Samra Zafar, and I am an international speaker and a best-selling author and a consultant and an educator on a lot of human rights and mental health topics. And I speak about this idea extensively, about the idea of collective resilience. And I truly believe that resilience is something that is a muscle that can be built over time with practice. And a lot of it includes positive self-talk to yourself and also about how you connect with other people. And in today's time, due to the crisis we're all in, and we're all in it together, we are feeling isolated, we are feeling disconnected, not just from each other, but oftentimes from ourselves too. And as I was reflecting, and these feelings of anxiety are coming up, not just in myself, but also in my family. I have two teenagers, and I was looking back at my own life, and I recall like certain amounts of certain periods of time when moments of crisis have led to these kinds of feelings. So I'm a child marriage survivor, I'm a domestic abuse survivor, and I'm also a sexual abuse survivor. And as I've built my new life, coming out from that journey, and practiced courage in the face of fear and kept that positivity going through some of the very, very dark times, there's definitely a lot of practices that I've picked up along the way. But the biggest lesson, as I look back and think, what was that game changer in my life that I'm here today? The biggest lesson I've learned is the power of connection. When we connect with each other from a human place and from a place of authenticity and showing up as who we are, not just for ourselves, but also for others around us, that's when we truly build collective resilience. And in order to do that, we need to be authentic on our own first. And that's why, um, I'm really happy to be part of today's session. I'm really honored to be here to be able to introduce our moderator and who's going to take it away in a bit. And I just wanted to add my 2 cents on why this is really important, not just for us, but for everybody around us, because when we can put on our oxygen masks and really be true to ourselves and strong, that's when we can help others around us too. So thank you for joining, and thank you for listening, and thank you for participating. With that note, I will pass it over to Linda Aylesworth, who's our moderator. And Linda has been with Global BC since 1981, and her previous year studying biology led Linda to specialize in health science and environmental journalism. Her reports have earned her an Edward R. Murrow Award for feature reporting, a National Radio Television News Director Dave Rogers Award, and 2 Regional Radio Television News Directors Associations Dave Rogers Awards, and a Jack Webster Award for Best Science Reporting. So definitely an amazing trajectory there, and no better person to lead our discussion today. And Linda is proudest of our profession when our stories make a difference in people's lives. And it certainly fits here, because we will be making a difference in a lot of people's lives. So take it away, Linda, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you so much. What a wonderful introduction. And I have to say, on top of all that, the reason I became involved with Anxiety BC in the old days was because of a family member who developed an anxiety disorder. So I at least have a personal understanding of how difficult this is for people. And I'm so happy that I was asked today to introduce to you our 3 expert panelists and to help guide other people through what they're going through in these incredibly difficult times. I think maybe I'll start with Dr. Maureen Whittall. She's the co-founder of Anxiety Canada back in 1999, but she's also with the Vancouver CBT Centre. So from Vancouver, Dr. Maureen Whittall, would you mind telling us a little bit about how you got into this field and why you began Anxiety Canada?
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all today. And it's been a lifelong journey for me professionally in working with people with anxiety. And I had more or less stumbled across anxiety in the mid 1980s doing some research work and loved it. And started doing it clinically, about 30 years ago, and loved it even more. And some of what I like so much about it is that the treatments that we have, the cognitive behavioral treatments that we have, they work well. There's no quote unquote cure for anxiety, but the tools that we can give people can help them to live better lives. And when I was working coming back to Vancouver after going to school, I'm working with Dr. Peter McLean at UBC. We were just seeing such demand for services and not the ability to be able to provide it. So he and I put together this organization, Anxiety BC, which is now Anxiety Canada, as a way to give people evidence-based resources for them to help themselves. And I am so pleased and proud that it has grown in leaps and bounds over the years.
Thank you. And throughout this town hall, Dr. Whittall is going to be addressing, among other things, the particular anxieties that adults address. But next, I'd like to introduce to you Professor Roz Shafran. Her specialty is pediatrics and older children as well. She is the chair of translational psychology at the UCL Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health in Hertfordshire, England. So would you mind sharing with us how you got into this field and to your particular specialty?
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here from England. And the way that I became interested in anxiety was because I had a family member with an anxiety disorder. So I grew up in a family where anxiety was surrounding us. And when I was studying at school, I was interested in people. I was interested in how people think and how people behave. And I wanted to make a difference. So I studied psychology purely at university. I had the privilege of being taught by real experts in the field of anxiety disorders. Came to Vancouver, where I met Dr. Whittall, and my personal interest and my professional interests have really galvanized me to try and improve the treatments for anxiety disorders. My work at the moment is looking at anxiety disorders in children and young people, particularly when they have physical health conditions, because we see that people are very much at risk, and trying to see whether or not we can get the right treatment to the right person at the right time. So that's where my interests are.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, we'd like to speak with Professor Catherine Ayres, who's in San Diego at the University of California. So would you mind explaining to us what your field of expertise is and how you got into it? And I'm hoping this is just a delay and she's actually with us.
Okay, sorry. Yes, so I am particularly interested in the treatment development of psychosocial interventions for older adults with anxiety disorders and OC spectrum disorders, also known as obsessive compulsive spectrum disorders. My current work focuses right now on hoarding disorder in older adults because it is the only known anxiety-related disorder to increase with age. So that's my current passion, and I kind of fell into this field. I was a trainee and doing a lot of field work in the community, and I would go into a lot of homes to provide services for seniors, and started to notice that hoarding was a significant issue for many folks, and it kind of took off from there. And yeah, so that's me in a nutshell.
Well, as you can tell to our audience, we unfortunately don't have a picture of you today. So we're just going to have to settle with a black screen. But while we've got you up now, so your specialty is older adults. Why don't you, from that perspective, explain to us what is anxiety and what are the particular struggles or different types of anxiety people are experiencing right now in times of a COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that everybody who is prone to anxiety is feeling much more anxiety, and folks that maybe are not prone to anxiety right now, it is very normal to have that kind of feeling of apprehension, dread, and fear. So I think, you know, one of the goals today for me personally was to just normalize this and say, this is a normal reaction to a world event such as this. And, you know, we really are all in it together. Everybody is going to be expressing it in different ways. So sometimes people will have physical sensations like their heart racing or pounding or feeling hot or shaky. Other symptoms will be things like anxious thoughts, a lot of what if this happens or what if that happens. And then also anxious behaviors. We saw a lot of that past few weeks with people running to the grocery store, stocking up, things of that nature. So kind of, you know, it'll show up in many different ways for different people, but it's a very common thing that we're all experiencing.
So I think we'll come back to you in a minute. We'll start breaking down those things. But in the meantime, let's go to Dr. Whittall right now. So adults, people who might well still have children at home, is there a different sort of anxiety that's being experienced right now?
Well, thanks, Linda. Let me just take a quick step back with your question in mind. First of all, we know that anxiety disorders are incredibly common. 1 in 4 people in their lifetime will suffer with a level of anxiety that interferes with how they live their lives, that's huge numbers. At any one given point, this crisis aside, any one given point in time, that number is 1 in 10 people. And then there are a significant portion of people that have what we call subclinical. So they have levels of anxiety, meaning that they have traits of it, as Dr. Ayres was talking about, but it's not sufficiently severe that it is interfering with how they live their lives, either their work life or their private life. So how it might be being experienced now is what will often happen with anxiety is that it will anxiety typically doesn't come from out of the blue. There's often some sort of precipitant, whether an environmental precipitant, and right now the whole world is going through a precipitating event that is kicking up a number of these anxious thoughts in people around uncertainty about what's my family going to look like? Is my family going to get sick? Am I going to get it? Am I going to spread it? Financial worries are paramount as well for people who either have lost their jobs or are experiencing some decrease in salary, and that uncertainty of when is our life going to return to what all of us took for granted until very recently. And then also some of the behaviors, as Dr. Ayres was talking about, that we're seeing of going in and buying excess things in stores. And some folks, you know, we've been hearing a lot about people who are not engaged and not following the public health guidelines. But on the other side of the coin, we're seeing people who, out of fear and anxiety, might be staying in at too much and not going out and these are people who don't have symptoms, and it's still right now okay to go out for a walk, but these are people who don't want to go out at all because of fear and anxiety.
Okay, well, we'll come back and address some of those individual things and what people might be able to do about it in a minute. Let's go to Professor Shafran. You work with children, and they have a really particular set of things that cause them anxiety and ways of showing it, don't they?
So it's very difficult as a young person to really comprehend what is going on. It's difficult for us as adults, but to understand that you may have be able to sort of spread a disease and cause harm to others. If you're prone to anxiety, being called a silent super spreader is a very threatening concept for people, children, young people. They can pick up on their parents' anxiety. And of course, schools are closed. I'm presuming they're closed in Canada as well. So really, people's lives have been turned completely upside down. In the UK, at least, they're being given schoolwork remotely. So they're trying to get to grips with the technology and the demands of having to do schoolwork, hand it in, work it all out in a very close sort of family environment where actually the technology may not be there. So there are lots of demands and sort of a sense of an inability to meet those demands and confusion and fear. So all of those things are going along for our young people who are being told, wash your hands, don't touch your face. And they're not really entirely sure why, except knowing that if you don't, something really bad will happen. Somebody could die if you don't. And that is very frightening.
And I guess on top of that, a child's going to pick up on their parents being stressed out by all this.
Absolutely. So parents are stressed out and present. So it's not even like you've got somewhere to go and you can really mask your anxiety from your children or keep it private. We're very stressed, and it's very difficult for that not to be apparent in our best. So when a child is not compliant, the sort of intensity with which you say, wash your hands, don't touch your face, is really very high and very threatening for people.
So you mentioned non-compliant, which makes me think of teenagers right now and young adults, because we are seeing a goodly portion of the people who aren't respecting physical or social distancing being these younger, more rebellious people. So what's going on in their heads that they're not obeying this and they're putting their own wants to be with their friends above what they should be doing?
So I think there's a variety of reasons that young people are finding it difficult to follow the rules. So I think for some people, it's just this sense of it can't happen to me. This is going on in the world, but it doesn't really apply to me. I'm a bit different. I won't get sick. And even if I do get sick, it'll only be very mild. So really, I'd rather go out and meet my friends. If I catch something, I catch something. There's a sort of mixture of being immune to it and it won't happen to me, and a selfish sort of self-preoccupation and self-focus that's very typical of adolescent behavior, and a sense of the teenage sort of brain and developing that peer relationships are very important and can take precedence over other things as well. So there's a whole lot of sort of different factors that combine that mean that adolescents on the whole engage in risky behavior. And this is just one example of a risky behavior.
So what's to be done about it? What can a parent do to convince their child to stay home?
I think it is about really the reality of the situation. So that people are not immune. We have all sorts, from a psychological perspective, we have all sorts of biases that make us think that things won't happen to us. So if you say, how likely is it, 50% of people will be in a car crash, you might say, how likely is it that you'll be in a car crash? And they go, oh, 10, I'm a really good driver. So actually, no, you're the same as everybody else. The same statistics apply to you. So I think really providing that education to young people, giving them other means of communication, thinking about what they can do as well as what they can't do. So in the UK, at least, we're sort of galvanizing a workforce to deliver some food and so on to elderly people who can't go out. So actually utilizing adolescents' energy to help them go out and serve their community and do something worthwhile, so that they're not just stuck in the whole time, bored, and just to take risks.
So Dr. Whitall, from the parents' point of view, and I know I'm kind of sticking on this now, but I know it's a real problem for a lot of people. From a parent's point of view, what would you suggest that they can do do you help them to empathize maybe with others? Is that the trick?
I think parents have a tough job ahead because I think we'll be at this for a while, and keeping interests of your children or your adolescents and stopping them from engaging in behaviors that might be risky will be tough. We may, and we're coming to you today from 3 different countries, so 3 different probably sets of guidelines or rules, and I think right now in the UK it's the toughest, and I think people are only allowed out for an hour a day, and so I think in those situations parents can say, look, you're not allowed out. It's not me, it's the government that is saying that. But and we're not there yet in Canada or the US. It doesn't mean that we won't be, but parents, they do have a tough job, and maybe also showing some of the consequences. I think there are some advertising promotions that are coming out talking about, look at what, this is what the end looks like to this. Do you want to be a part of this? And we all have a role to play. And that role is to contain and limit your contact with other people so this doesn't spread.
Thank you. Professor Ayres, anyone can be affected by COVID-19, we know that. But we also know that those at greatest risk of severe complications and even death are population over the age of 70 in particular. So obviously, health is a major source of anxiety for our older population, correct?
Oh yes, that is correct. What I was seeing in my clinical practice here in San Diego, I think in the start of all this, there was not much concern on the part of our seniors, and then it grew quite rapidly over time with the reports that older people were disproportionately suffering more from this. And so yes, I mean, I think that our older people are taking it seriously. It has increased their anxiety, but they're being smart about it in the sense that they are practicing the physical distancing. They are, we've moved all of our patients to telemental health. And I think it's also important for a lot of groups and organizations to realize that there's a lot of mental health services that are still open. They're just practicing differently. So we were able to work with our seniors whom some may have not been super comfortable with technology before. We had to quickly get them up to speed, figure out how to get them cell phones or borrow laptops from family members or so forth, teach them how to use the tools so that we can remain connected to them to provide services, but also to reduce that isolation.
And I think that's the reason we've been changing that term social isolation to physical isolation, because it's so important to stay connected. Isolation, and I'm imagining depression as well as anxiety, those would be, would you say, a particular risk for people that were older?
Yes, we're always concerned about that. We do know there's a lot of great research coming out now that is talking about the real problem we are having, even without this, of social isolation in seniors. And this is just reinforcing that issue, and we've got to come up with ways, savvy ways to combat that, because it will lead to other mental health issues such as increased depression and anxiety, and potentially even cognitive decline if somebody is not actively engaging cognitively in social activities or other kinds of activities.
So what are the kinds of things we can all do to help reduce that sense of isolation? Like for another person? For another person, well, for seniors in particular, or the family member that's older, I think we've been starting with a lot of teaching about how to use technology, because technology is really coming into play here as being an important part about helping people connect. So, so some seniors do not have cell phones. So we had to problem solve, how do we get senior cell phones?
or how do we get them laptops, and then teaching them how to use it and become comfortable. And to, you know, there's some stigma out there that older people are not good with technology. I don't believe that. I believe anybody can learn at any age. And so I think embracing technology is one thing that people can do, and then they can start to do FaceTime with grandchildren or phone calls even, but something to remain connected to other people, and also to make sure that those conversations are, you're cognizant of those conversations you're having, and you're not kind of just rehashing the bad news or escalating each other. So to focus on real reports about what's happening, the reality, and also, you know, to try to comfort other people too at this time.
Okay. I'm wondering if someone wants to address the sorts of behaviors that people are sometimes adapting as a result of their anxiety right now, and what they can do about it. I mean, since we've got you on the line right now, Professor Ayres, I understand there are hoarding and other things that you start to see more of.
Yeah, so hoarding disorder is different than what we've been seeing with people without hoarding disorder going to the store. So hoarding disorder is an urge to save items and great distress from discarding them. And I was joking with my staff the other day. I said, all of our patients are going to say to me, "I told you so," and you know, say that, "See, I was doing the right things by hoarding." Oh, that's not actually the case. Typically, the items have limited or value and are not usable. But what we have been seeing is a very fear-driven response of people buying a large amount of items at the store for fear of not being able to get them. And I think that for the vast majority of people, this is a very new and novel experience. So it's kind of the fear is feeding itself. So when people are seeing empty shelves or things, it drives them to, when they go to another store, maybe there isn't an empty shelf, so they will participate in emptying that shelf.
So Dr. Whitall, is there anything you'd like to add to that topic right there?
I think in terms of trying to normalize what's happening, to make normal of what is an abnormal situation, the best that we can is try to stick to some sort of schedule. I know I can speak for myself personally. I'm still getting up at the same time. I'm still keeping to my morning routine because it puts me in that mindset of, okay, things are different, but they're not that different, because there is still something that I can control, which is how I choose to behave right now. And so there are little things that people can do, whether it's dress in work clothes to work at home. It's also nice to not dress in work clothes once in a while, but if you are feeling a bit untethered and need to have some sense of structure, that might be a way to do it. So to get that structure from the little things that we can do.
How about things like the news? And I assure you, I'm not offended if anyone decides not to watch the news, because it's pretty darn depressing right now, and it's overwhelming. What is your advice for people in that regard?
So I've been pretty adamant about this for a few weeks now, is to limit the intake of news and to maybe arguably 10 or 15 minutes a day, and from reputable sources. There are some sources where it could be sensationalized, or the information that's being presented is not entirely accurate. So I do want people to go to reputable sites and sources.
While we've still got you up here, let's talk a little bit about, you said be self-compassionate. What does that mean?
Yeah, so this is a really hard time. You know, it doesn't matter if you didn't have a whole lot of anxiety before this. this is a really hard time. You know, we have taken our lives and that the freedom that we have in our lives for granted. And it's changed, and it has changed very rapidly. That's hard for people to get a hold of. And if you have any little bit of anxiety and difficulty dealing with uncertainty and see threat around the corner, it's going to be heightened even more through this potentially. So people need to be compassionate with themselves to say, look, this is tough. I'm doing what I can do. And also to be compassionate towards other people too, because we are all in the same situation right now. Some countries certainly worse than others, for sure. But that's why it's a pandemic. This is a worldwide problem, and we are all in the same boat together.
We're all having to find different ways of keeping busy. A lot of people are reading more. I imagine I'm not the only person who has had to switch from books that are kind of exciting to, well, quite frankly, in my case, Jane Austen, because it's safe. And I don't want to be upset when I'm reading. Do you have any advice in those sorts of things?
I certainly do what is going to make you feel okay in these moments, and whether it's Netflix or reading, or sometimes if people are having difficulty with concentration, reading something that is a little more approachable and easy to read. This is not necessarily a time for War and Peace, but something that's going to grab our attention, something that we're going to like, something that's going to pass the time.
Professor Shafran, where children are concerned, I first should ask if you want to continue on that vein at all first, before I ask you another question.
Well, the only thing I was thinking is about understanding of what anxiety is. So for me, think of the level of anxiety is sort of a combination of how likely you think that there's danger and how serious that danger would be, and then what factors could come in to help you or rescue you. So I think the messages that we're getting from the media really is that the probability of catching this virus is very high, that the seriousness for young people may not be high, but the seriousness for many others is high, and actually a young person can be a danger. And then actually the hospitals are going to be unable to cope and they won't be able to help you. So I can really see why people are extremely anxious, and they're looking for the information to help them estimate realistically the probability of harm, the seriousness of harm, and what's going on in terms of the doctors and the medics being able to help. So I would just like to reinforce what Dr. Whittle said about making sure that those estimates and the information you're getting is accurate. And that's a very critical component.
And then depending on the age of the child, how much do we tell them? I mean, there's that fear of scaring them, but then for certain ages, there's that fear of downplaying it, which can be dangerous.
It's very tricky. My friend has a toddler whose nursery was trying to do online lessons. I mean, something's different for the toddler. And so they know that something's happening, and it's about communicating in the best way possible what's going on in a way that people are going to understand. And I'm also thinking about some of the young people who have disabilities. So they might have deficit problems, they might have eating problems, they might have autism. I suppose that their comprehensibility to control their behavior in accordance with the rules is really very limited. So it's a very challenging situation.
A question was posed to me about a young person who is concerned that their parents weren't learning the proper way to manage this. So what would be your advice to that young person?
So this is a young person saying, oh, my parents aren't washing their clothes, my parents aren't obeying the rules. So a bit of role reversal where the young person's worried about their parents' behavior as opposed to the parent worried about the child. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Correct.
So I think what can happen in these situations is that basic parenting skills can go awry. My teenagers are forever telling me what to do, I have to say. And it's a question of actually, I have the information from the reputable sources about what to do. And after I have washed my hands for 20 seconds with interlinking and so on, then my hands are clean and it's okay for me to touch other things. I don't need to go back and wash my hands. And I'm going to show you and model for you what is appropriate behavior. So I think that's about using the parents' behavior to communicate the real risks that there are inside the home as well as outside the home, and saying, right, now it's okay. That's okay. We've washed our hands. We can touch things. We can go about our normal daily activities.
Thank you. Professor Ayres, I'm wondering, actually as the child or daughter-in-law of an older woman who is incredibly physically capable and is refusing to let this keep her from being out there. And as the children, we're very worried about her being out there, even though she's following everything, we're being protective of her. What's going on in the mind of a senior who's determined to keep their schedule going and not recognizing the fear of their kids?
Well, it sounds like your mom might know my mom because I'm having the same issue. I think that that is happening among seniors too. I mean, there are many that are taking it very seriously and have isolated. And then there are others that continue to go to the grocery store very regularly, even though they could probably skip several days and have the food, or going out walking or socializing with their close friends. And, you know, I think that, you know, we've had to have some conversations clinically in our clinic and with others of just presenting the facts, the Center for Disease Control guidelines, and saying, you know, this is a serious issue that you do need to change the way that you're behaving. Because you know, seniors are resilient. They've been through decades and decades of things and nothing stopped them yet. So that's probably, you know, the mindset of, well, you know, this will blow over, or, you know, I've been through worse traumas or historical events, and I don't want to stop living. It's not that they can't stop living a life, it's that they have to practice and behave differently during this time, and they will resume their normal life once this is over.
Okay. I actually did a story recently on coping skills. And one thing that one psychologist mentioned to me is it's been shown that being compassionate to others will actually help your emotional state. Would anybody like to address that?
Yeah. Happy
Okay,
to.
Dr. Shafran?
Absolutely. Definitely. That there's a lot of work on altruism and doing things for other people that can actually really improve your mood and make you feel better about yourself, give them meaning and purpose in your life, all the things that can be lost when somebody's mood is low and they're depressed. So actually engaging in these sorts of behaviors, and it's a bit of a catch-22. So sometimes you think, well, actually, you have to be motivated to engage in these behaviors and to be compassionate towards others and altruistic. But well, it can be the other way around. If you don't feel like it, even if you don't feel like being compassionate, if you act in a compassionate way, then the emotions, the genuine emotions, can often follow, and the mood improvement can follow from the behavior as opposed to leading to the behavior. You get both. It's a positive, virtuous cycle.
Right. A lot of people have said to me that they think they're holding it together really well, And while they're driving somewhere or just have a moment, whether they're seeing something joyful or something sad or something triggers tears to come to their eyes, just an overwhelming sense of emotion. Is that natural right now? Is that a healthy release? Is there something we should know about that? Who would like to address that? Dr. Whitall?
I can certainly talk about that. And that during this highly stressful time, I'll give you a bit of an analogy to as to how I think about it and describe it, is that during these stressful, uncertain times, it's a bit like wrapping yourself in flypaper, that things that would normally slide right off of you don't, they stick to you. And our emotions are already higher, which corresponds to things that are going on in our bodies that are in a heightened state. And because of that stress, we lose a little bit of the buffer that we would normally have to absorb some of these things. And that is one of the, I shouldn't say consequences, but it's one of the things that can happen as a result, is that we just become more emotional about a variety of things, whether they're positive things or negative things. We're going to start to see a strengthening of emotion across the board and things sticking to us that would not normally stick to us.
Now, I know that you and I have talked today already about some coping mechanisms. We haven't really touched very much on cognitive behavioral therapy. How can that help the average person who doesn't necessarily, know how it works or had an expert take them through it?
Right. So I could probably talk for several hours on how cognitive behavior therapy could help certainly some of the resources of Anxiety Canada will make it very clear on what can be done and how people can do it. And Professor Shafran made reference to this, is that people are, and I'm not, in saying this, I'm not saying that there is no threat. There is an actual threat here. I think people are probably overestimating the threat, and please do not take that as to you don't need to listen to the public health people, because you do. And so use those as your guideline for how to behave. But there are people who are vastly overestimating threat. That I'm getting it for sure, and then my mother's going to get it and she's going to die. That probably is a little bit of overestimating threat and jumping to a conclusion, and being able to recognize some of those traps in how we think is part of it, part of how cognitive behavior therapy can help. Also, being mindful of some of the behaviors that you're doing. And yes, we absolutely need to do things like wash our hands and be mindful of what we touch and stay away from people, that keeping that 6-foot distance because of the possibility of the virus being in the air. But there are people who are going above and beyond that, and that is driven by their anxiety and fear of the threat. People who might be bleaching boxes that are coming from Amazon, as an example. People who are not going outside at all. People without people who are otherwise healthy with no underlying health conditions, not going outside at all. People washing their hands until they're raw, cracked, and bleeding. That doesn't help at all. In fact, that behavior, ironically, makes you more likely to have a problem, because then if you have a break in your skin, it's another way for any kind of virus to get in. So cognitive behavior therapy talks about being able to identify the thoughts that are making the perception of risk greater, than it actually is, and also modifying the behaviors attached. While we do have to be mindful of what's happening and not go out and blithely touch everything in public and then have a sandwich without eating our hands. We can't do that anymore in the context of this virus. So we do have to be mindful, but also understanding that we cannot ever get rid of all risk, and trying to do so makes us very focused on the bit that we can't get rid of, and ultimately ends up increasing our perception of the risk.
Professor Shafron, do you have something to add to that?
So in our group and with our patients, we've been doing a lot of problem solving. And I think probably one of the most useful cognitive behavioral strategies at this time. So there are lots of problems that are causing anxiety. So there's the threat of the virus, but there's also the anxiety about living and being confined with your family and not going out, and family arguments, and just difficult living circumstances. So even being able to problem solve things like who uses the computer when, how do you share the iPad, what are the different solutions, which ones work, which ones, and so steps to problem solving can be a really, really helpful tool on a practical daily basis to try and improve quality of life.
So at this point in time, I just want all the people that are tuning into this town hall right now to know that we're open to any questions that they have. And I not knowing what device people are on, I'm hoping you can figure out where you would put those questions in. And so while we're waiting for any questions from you, I would put it to our three expert panelists. What kind of questions are you getting that you would like to get the answers out there to the public? So, Dr. Whitall, you look like you have something to say.
Right. So in my practice, I see lots of folks who are anxious and who have obsessive compulsive disorder and health anxiety. And these are people who are particularly hit hard from an anxiety perspective. And that these people are very much on guard for the early signs and symptoms of it, in part because of their fear of getting it. So while it is normal to have a variety of physical sensations in any given day, because we are on guard, we're much more likely to say, oh, that's it, there it is. For example, I had a flush about 5 minutes ago, and if I was scared of getting the virus, I might think, oh my God, do I have a fever? I might be starting to feel my head. I might go take my temperature. I might be very watchful of myself. And we can't stop that from happening. It's going to happen. It's one of the natural outcomes of being scared of something. And so knowing that that's going to happen, we have to, in some ways, almost make room for the fact that it is and understand that it is. And that might be part of the explanation for why we notice things. Because when we start to pay attention to something, we start to see it more. So that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what that is. If you are pregnant, you start to see more pregnant people out on the street. Mm-hmm. If you are worried or concerned that you're going to get sick, you're going to start paying attention to your body. You're going to start noticing more physical sensations, and then start to interpret those physical sensations in a way that is consistent with what you are fearing, okay, which will make more physical sensations.
Mm-hmm. So, Professor Ayres, have I missed any key questions, things that our older citizens might want to know about?
Well, I think if I were to kind of give a message to older people or people that are that know of or have family members, I would say, you know, similar to what has already been said among the other age groups, is that, you know, it's really important to have structure right now, and to come up with some kind of routine that does include healthy behaviors. I think that taking, as was said earlier, a problem-solving approach to things. So what's the healthiest way for me to get secure, good, healthy foods and make sure I'm eating appropriately, getting my medications and taking them on time, and getting some exercise, and then also that social connection. So at this time, you know, now you can no longer go to your local gym or, you know, ask a friend out for a cup of coffee. That can't happen. But what can happen for you to remain socially connected and not feel isolated or alone? Those would be kind of the top three things that I would advise seniors to pay attention to. And also, as Maureen was talking about, cognitive behavioral therapy works for older people. It continues to work throughout the lifespan. So there are a lot of tools that Maureen mentioned already that can be helpful for seniors to incorporate into their new routine.
All right, great. Well, maybe this is the time to let people know about, if they don't already know about, some of the help that is available online to them. So anxietycanada.com /COVID-19, you're going to find a lot of resources there. Maybe we're going to go back to Dr. Whitall because this is her baby. And you will find their information to get the MindShift CBT app, correct? Could you tell us about that?
Correct. So is one of the projects that Anxiety Canada took on a few years ago was to develop an application that it contains evidence-based resources to help people manage anxiety. That app was redone about a year ago, maybe 6 months ago, and re-released. And I believe 70, 80,000 active users on a regular basis, and a couple 100,000 downloads of the app. So it contained in there are things like a daily check-in to see how you're feeling, some relaxation type tools, which might in these stressful times, as I like to say, take a little bit of the air out of the balloon. That might make it a little easier for you to walk through day to day. It helps to identify some of those anxiety-provoking thoughts that we were talking about earlier, as well as how to face some fears and take yourself out of your comfort zone whilst still being mindful of the public health guidelines.
And perhaps we should reiterate as well that, you know, we're here today not just for people who have diagnosed with, you know, clinical anxiety disorders, but I mean, there can't be many people in this world today that are not feeling anxiety.
It's true. And I think it might be a very unique time for family members of people who have anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder or health anxiety, get a little tiny window of what it's like to be in their family member's shoes. Because we all, oh, I shouldn't say all of us, but the vast majority of us are experiencing some anxiety, some heightened sense of threat. And the tools that we have, I think, are useful across the spectrum. Doesn't matter how much anxiety you are experiencing. The reasons that people experience anxiety are by and large, from a cognitive and a behavioral perspective, the same thing. So it's not, they're not qualitatively different, it's quantitatively different. And with this COVID-19 threat and the people who in the past might not have been engaging in anxiety behaviors or avoiding or having threatening thoughts are. And the same tools that we use for people for whom the anxiety is interfering with their life can be used for others as well, for sure.
Do you think it's helpful to remember, and sometimes you have to remind yourself that it's not just you, that everybody is affected by this, whether it's your life savings that are really depleted thanks to the market's collapse, or you're not going to work right now, or you're self-isolated, and everyone's going through something. Is there something comfort that comes from that unification?
I hope so. I think, and that speaks to a little bit of that we're all in this together, and that it's affecting each of us in a slightly different way. But it would be very difficult to be in this situation and be completely unaffected by it.
And Professor Shafran, how does a child, how does a parent, keep the mood up in spite of all of this? How do you as a parent keep up for your children so they're not worried when you are?
I think it's about looking after yourself as well as your child, because everyone is in such close quarters. I mean, the schooling situation is very, very different. People's lives and their daily lives are very different. And it's about looking for some of the positives in that. So not having to get up quite so early to get to school. So that's a big bonus in terms of being able to sleep in and drawing attention to the positives. Being able to think about some things that you could do together as a family can be helpful as well. But making sure that there is, even if it's just in the toilet with the door shut, that you have that time perhaps with no input from a screen, because there's a lot more screen time going on. Making sure that you have that to yourself, that you get your own exercise in, that all of the things that we're talking about doing for our family members, that you still can do for yourself in terms of healthy eating, exercise, structure, and so on.
And, we just got a question that's right up your alley. Could you confirm strategies to communicate importance of washing hands, not touching face, not touching packages, etc., for kids that are under 5 without communicating stress intensity of our remarks?
So I think the way that we communicate messages is very important. So to convey an important message, it is better not to shout it from room to room and say, "Don't touch that." I was in a supermarket the other day and someone was screaming, "Don't touch that, don't breathe, don't." And everybody's looking and everyone's feeling anxious because of the anxiety in her voice. So I think it's about saying at the beginning of the day, remember we're on, and these are our rules, so this is what we're doing. And it can be in pictorial form, so you can have a picture. So in the same way you have a picture of going to the toilet and washing your hands, you would have a picture perhaps of if you touch a package, you might want to wash your hands afterwards. And this is how we wash our hands. You can do a reward chart for it. So instead of saying, you mustn't do this, you mustn't do that, you mustn't do that, actually when they're engaged in the behaviors, then say, "That's fantastic. You washed your hands really well that time. Brilliant. Let's, here's a point towards a positive activity." So the same sort of parenting strategy is about communicating very clearly, simple, short messages, and not going on and giving too many instructions in one sentence, direct eye contact when you're talking to the young person, and rewarding the behavior that you want to see.
Now, we only have a few minutes left. We've got several questions here, but I'm just going to put this one so each of you might have a brief answer. We'll start because we're on you right now, Dr. Shafran. If someone had 5 minutes only to do an activity to help with their general anxiety, what would you suggest that be?
Breathing. Breathing slowly, breathing in, breathing out. And using the Mindshift app that Dr. Whittle has talked about to just bring it down quietly and slowly.
And Professor Ayres, what would your advice be, your answer be to that question?
I think that my advice is to really check out that app, because there's going to be a lot of different tools and exercises, and some are going to work better for others, for some than others. So I would definitely check out that app. I would also, there's a lot of tools in cognitive behavioral therapy that I'm sure that app will get into, about different kinds of exercises that you can do that are pretty quick to do, like a thought record or something like that.
And finally, a different question for you, Dr. Whitall, before we say goodbye here. Someone is saying they have a friend who is obsessing to the point of starting to see viruses, seeing the faces of strangers and friends as viruses. And this friend is trying to talk the friend down. What do you advise for friends and family who have loved ones who are not coping well at all?
Right. So that I think the answer to that is multi-layered. Someone like that is in all likelihood spending a lot of time reading about it, accessing information about it, spending a lot of time maybe on social media. They need to limit that and come back to what they can control. And everyone can think about it like a little experiment, and everyone can do this little experiment, is disengage from the news of it. And we can't disengage from the reality of it because our lives are all different right now. But do what you can to normalize your existence. So get up at the same time, put that structure in place, talk to a friend online, text somebody that you haven't spoken to in a while to check in on them. If it is doable for you, go out for a walk or for a bike ride. Something that is going to give you a sense of that you have some control over how you are living your day-to-day life. And if those thoughts are coming, then just to say, you know what, not now, I just need to just put that away and let me refocus back on what I'm doing.
Thank you so much. Well, believe it or not, our hour is already up. That went fairly fast as far as I feel, but I hope that everyone that's tuned in has gained some skills to help them through this difficult time. I want to remind you, a lot of information is waiting for you at anxietycanada.com/COVID-19, all one word. And just remember, we are in this together. Reach out to one another. Get out there as best as you're allowed to get out there with safe physical and social distancing, and we're going to get through it. And, you know, depending on how well this is received, there are going to be other town hall meetings potentially every week. We'll keep you informed on the anxietycanada.com website. So thank you so much. And thank you to our three wonderful panelists for coming together to try to help everyone else get through this. So stay safe, wash your face. No, wash your hands. Keep your hands away from your face. Remember, 6 feet apart, and maybe we'll see you next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.